But we'll go straight into it. Again, thank you guys for checking out this review. Watch Devs. It's on Hulu. Yeah. So now for the spoiler section of this, I will let Josh. You can go first with anything spoilery you want to talk about. Obviously, the ending is probably the biggest thing we might want to touch on.
Yeah, sure. I guess what I would say now, okay, I'll expand on what I mentioned in my opening remarks, which is about what I really like about the show, which is sort of the shape the show takes. So Evan and I discussed after we'd watched through the first 5 episodes, Evan and I discussed like, do you think they'll do a season 2? Is this going to be a one-off miniseries? Like, how far are they going to take the show? Because there seemed like there was so much potential built into the idea of devs as an organization, the stuff they're doing with computers and everything. And then, interestingly, we both watched episode 6, and then we both had the same impression. We were like, okay, this is clearly a miniseries. It can be completely self-contained in 8 episodes. We know exactly what shape the story. Like, the story clarifies itself so well, starting with episode 6. I think that it's about Lily. It's, I would say, a little bit less about the science and more about the characters, the specific characters in this season. And I really like that. And I would say, in regards to the end, another funny thing that we had when we watched the end was, at this point, obviously, we've seen episodes 1 through 7. Then we watch episode 8. And I said to Evan, I was like, episode 8 is roughly what I thought it would be, given episodes 1 through 7. And Evan was like, yeah, I felt the same way.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I appreciated that with this show specifically, because normally in another show, you might be like, oh, it's predictable. I kind of knew what they were going to do. It wasn't surprising. But this is a show that puts into question the idea of things being determined before they've happened, before they've been witnessed, whatever. And I like the idea. I enjoyed thinking about, could the show have done anything different in episode 8, given the first 7? In a way, like, the ending was sort of determined by the previous shape of the previous episodes. And I really like that. I kind of felt like the shape of the show was restaging the question that is happening in the show, the question of things being determined. So I thought that was fun. And that's something that I appreciated because it's specific to the content of the story, right? Like, normally that would make me feel disappointed with the end of a show. I kind of want to be surprised a lot of times, but I thought it really worked with this. And that's what I was getting at when I was saying the show understands its limits. It knows what it needs to do, and it executes that really effectively for me. So, yeah, I guess I'll let you guys say more, and then I'll go back in. But that was kind of my thought when I finished. I really liked it. I felt very satisfied with the show, even at the formal level, accomplishing what it wanted to do within the story itself.
Yeah, like, me and Josh are talking about it. What he's saying is, like, yeah, we both knew, like, they've kind of strapped themselves into a direction. They were like, they purposely don't show you anybody contradicting any prediction they see. So as far as we know, like, why aren't they doing it? Like at some point you'll think, oh, why haven't they ever done it? And it's a lot of the times it's because of the authority that they have, as they're kind of seeing it as deterministic. But we both know at some point when it got into the 8th episode, if Lily didn't do exactly what we said, made the choice to kind of disregard that thing, it would have felt like a much cheaper show. And when she did make the choice to break a prediction, we saw it coming, but it was kind of the perfect thing that we wanted to happen, and it worked with the story, and it kind of folds out in an interesting way. It plays out, yeah.
Yeah, you could imagine a show like this doing a sort of really lame thing at the end where it's like Lily makes a choice, she departs from the prediction, and then it's just like, yeah, humans do have freedom. We're better than computers. Isn't that awesome? And kind of like ending it on sort of like a really weak note. But the show doesn't do that. And part of the reason we knew that it wouldn't is because we know Alex Garland, and we've seen the things that he's willing to do with the end of a movie, like Ex Machina, for instance.
Or Annihilation.
Or Annihilation, yeah. The show, we knew it wasn't going to just sort of give in to a sort of weak, like, you can make choices, It sticks within its universe, and it really challenges the viewer in a way that is expected, but that seems like the best possible option for the episode.
I think I'll respectfully disagree just a little bit for the last episode. I didn't like it as much just because I guess I felt like it was like what you were saying. It was a little bit predictable, and nothing besides the very end where they're transferred to a different reality. Besides that, everything sort of felt like that's what was going to happen, and I feel like they didn't play around with the idea of choice enough, or I don't know, because they do an interesting job where they're like, hey, you're going to say this. Like, this is, they literally show her, hey, this is how it's going to happen. And I don't think the show did a good enough job to be like, okay, well, here is why Lily is able to make, like, is able to get off these tram lines that we're all set on, that we can't, we can't get away from. Like, there's a scene where they have, I think, like 8 workers in there, and they're literally saying the lines as they're being repeated a second earlier, and that's like proving their theory where it's like, hey, you literally can't, like, there's nothing else you can do. You can't control this.
I didn't see it that way, though. I thought a second was the time they thought of as you can't react fast enough. You can't react to what you're seeing on screen in 1 second, so you just end up doing it.
But I feel like you could, if you, like, I don't know, if I saw something like myself on screen and he just said something like, who is this? Then I would be like, what? Like, I wouldn't be like, who? Or at least I wouldn't finish the sentence that I was saying, if that makes sense.
But don't you think that the whole point of that scene was to show, like, this is what I mean. They're playing with the science in a way that's specific to the show. So I guess to be more specific, what I'm saying is, like, the characters in the show, in that specific scene, the workers at Debs, have the exact same mindset you do. And Forrest even says this in one of the episodes. He's like, if I know what's going to happen in 5 minutes, if it predicts in 5 minutes that I'm going to go to the bathroom, what if I just sit here for 6 minutes? Why can't I just do that? They explicitly pose that question, and I feel like that scene was the way of the show saying, no, in this universe that we've built for the show, you can't. And the shock of the workers in that scene, the coders, is having the mindset that you're describing right now, having that challenged by what they're seeing on screen. Like, they think what you think. They think, of course, if I saw somebody predict what I was going to do in a second, I could just do differently. And the horror of that scene is that, no, actually, you can't, because that's not the world you live in. You live in the Devs world, which might be a little bit different from, but I think that's a point of artistic license and less like a scientific claim about whether humans are free or not. It's like, this is the world of the show, and the harsh reality that the characters have to face is coming to terms with that. Like, even at the end, when Lily makes a so-called choice and throws the gun out so she knows she's not going to shoot Forrest, the interesting thing about that scene is that the end result is the same, because Stewart turns off the magnetic field in the little pod they're trying to go through, and it still does fall and crash. And we still do get the same shot of Lily on the crawling on the ground from above that we got in, like, episode whatever, 3 or 4 or something like that. So then you have another interesting elaboration. Even though someone made a choice, Lily, somebody else, Stewart, made a different choice, and we did get the same end result. So was it a choice? Like, I feel like they're doing things a little bit more. I guess I would say I would disagree with you just a little bit. Like, I think what they're doing is a little bit more subtle than just misunderstanding whether or not people can make choices about things. I think they've set a world for themselves, and they're working within it. That, for me, my impression was they know their limits and they're sticking to them without breaking them in a sort of cheap way.
Yeah, it was the director's choice. So you're never gonna see anybody break it, and that's just kind of how it is. I know that doesn't, like, maybe doesn't make sense as much, but, like, if they had broken it in episode 4, then you can't have any big moment in episode 8. And also, as me and Josh are talking, a lot of people might end up feeling pretty sympathetic for Forrest because of the whole daughter thing. But in the end, if you really look at everything he's done, he's kind of just an evil, ambivalent kind of evil. He, like, him and what's the name of her
Keaton?
his partner?
Keaton.
Him and Katie. Katie knows that her friend was gonna die and fall off the dam, but she does it anyway, even though she doesn't even believe in determinism. But she just kind of buys into what Force is doing, and Force gets everybody else to buy into it.
Okay, but that scene in particular, because I felt like that was still, hey, Katie's theory is still like applicable because there's multiple different universes here, but in every single different variant that we're showing, he still falls off. Lyndon, or
but in a way, yeah, but that's the thing. They were talking about all the quantum stuff, but he falls in every version, and she knew he was gonna fall. Then she could have changed it, but she chose not to. And then I think that's why she's so horrified at the end, even though she talks about not believing in it. She clearly
if she doesn't
think
believe
everything
it, then
was gonna happen.
that's her believing her words that she's saying to Lyndon. Does that make sense?
No, but she doesn't. She states outright, like, many times, that she believes he's right about the many worlds theory. She says it from the very beginning when Forrest, like, picks her up at that college campus. She always believed the many worlds was correct and that Forrest was wrong, but she kind of lets herself believe in him.
What she believes in the many worlds is what I'm saying. So, like, in that instance, it's her, like, saying, oh, hey, one of these worlds, you're still going to exist. Like, that's what I firmly still believe. Not in one singular timeline. Because she even says, like, to Forrest, oh, well, we're, like, enemies, and I'm trying to prove that I'm the right one.
Yeah, you could be right. Like I said, me and Josh were talking earlier, there is some faults in the way they talk about the timelines. Like, from that shot, it appears every version of him fell off. But if it was really, the multiple worlds, then it's more than just that moment. And I don't know, there would be some universe where he was never at the dam, but it gets a bit confusing if you go farther than that.
I will. Let me just say one thing though, which Evan and I have both talked about. Which, first of all, that episode does stick to the mini worlds interpretation, because the most important shot in that episode is like a 2-second shot, and it shows Lyndon sitting at the bottom,
being on the
alive. So that is within the scope of the show. That is a possibility. My problem, and this is okay. My problem with the way they talk about the mini worlds interpretation in the show is that if you were applying like a real world science perspective, then okay, there are many worlds. Lyndon can both die and live. Cool. But the characters, Katie and Forrest, always act as if they are 100% certain that the prediction they've seen in devs will be the correct one. And my problem is like, well, if it's a mini worlds thing, like, how do you know? You can't know. Lyndon might die, Lyndon might live. But Katie always behaves as if she knows for sure that Lyndon will die. So I think that's a bit of a problem with the science. But again, I feel like I'm more inclined to think about this more as like a work of art that's using artistic license to bend what would otherwise be like logical problems for the sake of creativity, interesting story, cool characters, etc., and less for the sake of like sticking to the real problems of like quantum computing or something, which nobody understands anyways. So
sure. And the thing that I guess I'll say on top of that is, while I do think there's like some small like logical stuff that I'm like, I don't know about this. I think the whole concept, and this is why like Alex Garland's such an interesting individual in making like sci-fi realized, is the whole concept of all these different timelines playing out. He does that several times, and there's no better use of that than seeing Forrest's family ripped from him. I forget which episode it is, but it's just every single, you see that thing and you understand, like, again, Evan's right. Like, this is our villain. This is the guy that's a dark force that's operating all the bad parts of our universe. but like in a small moment, it's like, okay, you can sort of understand why someone is like, oh, well, there's no multiverse theory, because why would I be banished to this hell where like I, one out of a million, different circumstances, have to watch like my wife and my kid be ripped from me. And it's man, I just remember that scene, like all the different things where like the car barely misses, the car lightly hit, like all these different things, the different situations. I think they do really well. And I think they introduce it right before with Katie at school. And that's a really cool shot too, to sort of like, hey, this is what we're capable of, like cinematography wise and like editing and special effects. And then it's like, oh, well, here's the actual reason you wanted to introduce like this, because that's used so like I can't think of a greater execution of that type of thinking than that particular scene.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, that effect they use of the mini worlds go slightly different every time, that's introduced, and then they use it pretty consistently throughout the rest of the show once they've introduced it. And I just like that they kept it in. It wasn't a one-off episode thing. It was actually very helpful in illustrating what came after.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of different other stuff. Oh, another thing that I think was kind of cool. It kills off the quote unquote main character in the first episode in Sergey. Obviously, like some shows have done that, but it's just like an interesting. Again, that's what sort of like brings me into the show. It's like, well, what do you even do? And I assumed I don't know. In my interpretation, I was like, oh, well, Lily's going to figure out how to like play with these different timelines where like Sergey doesn't die. And no, it's very clearly like a different show once it sort of gets going on. And it's more about Lily and Jamie and the devs team, like sort of competing with each other. Which I wanted to bring up another scene that I think is subtly really great, where basically they go to visit. Keep in mind, like this is the man that killed Lily's long-term boyfriend. And like the guy that's like the guy that controls Kenton, who's like the muscle that can kill anybody. They go to their house, and Katie tells Lily like, oh, hey, or no, Forrest tells Katie, I think. I forget which one tells them, but they're like, oh, you don't want to talk to Forrest. He's not going to tell you anything. Because basically Forrest is just going to be like, hey, you're going to die. Like, I've already seen it. Let's move on. Like, let's just get to it. And I think like while that whole scene is going on with Katie and Lily and her sort of explaining like everything that's happened like in the past, doing the most like dude bro thing and being like, they're trying to talk to each other and he's like, oh, you got your fingers broken, huh? And Nick Offerman's a tremendous actor. And then just the like cold look Jamie gives, like, yeah, you sent the guy to break my fingers. And then like Nick Offerman's like, well, want to throw a frisbee? And they're just out there like casually throwing frisbee with one another while Kenton's like presumably watching the whole time in a car. I don't know. For whatever reason, I just really like that visual.
Yeah. It seems like you really like. I think both those scenes you brought up were both from 5.
I believe so. Yeah. I really dig 5 as an episode.
So it is
but
pretty
again,
consistent throughout now that I think about
it. Yeah. 5 is actually the lowest rated episode. But again, like it's 8.3 to 7.6. It's not that much of a dip. But do you guys have any other spoilers you want to bring up?
I think the guy who plays Stuart ended up being my favorite just because they give him these poems to read and just things to say, and he has a great voice, and he's probably doing the most. I don't know if alive, but I don't know. He really nails all his. I like the way he came into focus at the end.
Well, I also think more than anything, I think Lyndon, I think
Lyndon's
Lily, great. I think Forrest, I think no, I just think all of those people, even Kenton, like all of their set obligations very early on. And then that character in Stewart, it's like, okay, obviously like he likes devs and he's looking out for people and he doesn't necessarily agree with Forrest, but there's something there. You never really know like where he's leaning towards at any point, if that makes sense. And I thought I do agree with you. Like he's given like a decent amount to do.
Oh, another thing I thought of. I always thought like everyone sees Lily's storyline as the worst, more boring storyline. It was kind of hampered from the beginning, just just the way it's set up. It was kind of hampered from the beginning because most of the time she's trying to figure out this conspiracy that we know every answer to in the first episode. So everything she's trying to figure out, we already know. We're just so far ahead of her that, yeah, we're getting revelations from them while she's getting revelations of stuff we already know. So it inherently comes off as a less interesting storyline.
Yeah, no, I can see that.
One thing I wanted to throw in before we kind of already moved on from Stewart, but I wanted to say more about his character. I think the best scenes in the show are his scenes, particularly the end of 7 and the role he plays in 8. They give him a really incredible role to fulfill. At the end of 7, when Lily arrives at the devs building, he's standing there in front of that little thing they take across the void to get to the computer room, you know? First when Forrest arrives, he's standing there reciting Shakespeare in the echo of this empty, beautiful room, that scene gave me chills. I mean, it's just incredible. Mm-hmm. When Lily arrives, he plays an interesting role, and I just thought about this. It changes the way I think about what he did in episode 8. So in 7, I thought that the motif was pretty obvious, that he was like the guy in mythology who carries people across the river Styx, like to their death. He literally stands there and like draws the boat to her, and he's like, if you want to go, you can go, but like you need to know where you're going. When I saw 7, I was like, amazing. It's an incredible position to have this really wonderful character stand in. But also the question, it is a bit odd. Why does he do what he does in 8? Because he hates Forrest. And finally, in episode 8, you see someone, Lily, depart from the prediction and kind of thwart Forrest. You'd think he'd be like on her side. But then he turns the thing off and still lets them fall and crash on the floor. And it's like, why would he do that? What's his motivation there? But I just thought about this. I think that he's now playing the character of someone who's just sent people like to hell. And someone is like coming back out of hell into the normal world where normal people want to live their everyday lives, and they're bringing something terrible with them. And he can't allow that anymore, right? He can't let these people who know too much go back to the world. So even though he hates Forrest, and he would otherwise agree with Lily, if that's the role he's playing now in the show, he has to make them crash. Again, it's a question of choice. He has to send them down because they can't go back. And in that sense, he becomes something like the hero of the show, right? Mm-hmm. He saves the rest of the world from the nonsense of devs. And now those characters are contained within the dev simulation. They can't go back and rip the rest of the world for everybody else. They're stuck there because of what Stewart did. So this show does really subtle things at this level. Like Stewart to me is the elevated hero at the end of the story. It's not Lily or Jamie. I think it's him. I said this to Evan. Those last 2 episodes, in large part because of Stewart, are 2 of my favorite individual episodes I've seen of a show in a very long time. Like I struggle with, there are other shows I might like more, but in terms of picking out certain scenes or certain episodes on their own, I really can't think of that many more that I like a lot more than that.
And I mean 7, then now that we're in spoilers, so there's 3 deaths, the Russian reveal, the caveman scene with Nick Offerman just talking about cavemen might be one of my favorite scenes in the show. And yeah, that's a just incredible episode. And also Stewart, they never confirmed it, but I always you don't need to know, but I always thought, because he seemed pretty, seeing as he's the one who did the 1 second thing and he was about to do it to 10 seconds. I'm kind of in my own headcanon. I always assumed he did look at the future. he saw Lyndon die, and that was the final straw. And so he was like, okay, I'm going to do this to Forrest. And also, I just thought he actually knew you could make a choice. And so, like, she asked him at the end, why did you do that? And he's like, it was predetermined, almost jokingly at her, at how she always thought everything was determined, even though, like, her and Forrest, and now they were finally proven wrong. Hayden?
Yeah. Sorry. I was just thinking of the next thing. I think we're good. Spoiler wise, right?
We're good. Yeah, we got everything
Okay.
we wanted.
Yeah, then that'll. Sorry, I was like, where to go with this, and I was like, maybe Nick Offerman shaved his beard and doesn't have the long hair anymore. But all right, that's gonna wrap it up for a spoiler discussion. If you have any thoughts and opinions on devs, feel free to share down below. I reply to comments, and it's always nice to hear from other people to sort of know like where a couple people like gauge this. I know like my dad wasn't as high as any of us on the last episode. I know it left him with the sense of like, yeah, it's all right, but he still loves the show in general. So just different opinions. Again, let us know. And if you agreed with any of us, share that down below. Thank you guys for checking this out, and thank you, Josh. Thank you, Evan.
You're welcome.
You are welcome.
We had no choice but to participate.
It was
gotta bring the Jimmy Neutron boys.